Greetings viewers, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're taking a look at the $300 Outback I bought last week. Went ahead and did a full inspection front to back on it just to see how good or how bad of a condition this $300 car is. Got a list here compiled with some prices, and we're going to go over and see exactly what all would be needed parts-wise and price-wise to get this car mechanically sound to be a daily driver again. This is a 2002 Outback 2.5 base model 5-speed manual transmission. For those of you that may not have seen the other video where I picked the car up, I did pay $300 cash for the car. It does have a clean title. Mileage is 176,000 miles. And there is a slight bit of rust on the car. It's nowhere near as bad as I initially thought it was. The car originally came out of Maine, but around 2011, 2012, I believe it was sold in Charlotte, North Carolina, and spent the latter part of its life there. So the rust really isn't as bad as I initially thought it was when we looked at it on the trailer. I've gotten under the car. We do have that bit of rust there on the driver rear where the bumper mount is and the mud flap is. That is, you know, not great, but it's more cosmetic. On suspension components, the rear cross member, front cross member, there's not much rust to speak of. The only real damage I saw due to rust was where the rear brake back plates had rusted through in a couple spots. Other than that is some surface rust, a good sanding with a heavy wire brush or something like that to knock off the loose chunks, and a good coating of Rust-Oleum probably would prevent this car from getting any worse. But as I said, it's mainly cosmetic. There's not any structural damage, nothing that would make the car unsafe to drive. Other than that, as we saw in the video, it was a smoked-in car. The interior is not great, but we're not going to talk about that in this video. As I said, it's just going to be on the mechanicals and getting this car to be a reliable daily driven car. How much would it cost to get this $300 car safely on the road? These prices are pretty much ballpark. I have looked up most of them to get a very close number, but I have rounded up or down to the nearest, you know, to make it even numbers to work with here. So right off the boat, we're going to need 4 tires. The tire tread is not completely worn out, but it is worn pretty low. There is some uneven wear on the tires, and the tires are old. They're 2014 date code, so they're 6 years old at this point, and they got a lot of dry rot in them. So it would be good to go ahead and put a new set of tires on it. A new set of tires, mounted and balanced, about 500 bucks. After tires, our next big concern is the engine. The engine does have lots of oil leaks to be expected on higher mileage Subaru engine, especially one that hasn't particularly been cared for as meticulously as it maybe should be. So we got a rear main leak. We've got the oil air separator plates leaking. Basically everything on the back side of the engine, the oil pan's leaking, the head gaskets are seeping oil externally, which is to be expected with 176,000 miles and the original single layer coated head gasket. I'm surprised they've lasted this long. Normally they fell about 120,000 miles. That said, the head gaskets are just something we could keep an eye on at this point because they're just seeping oil. They're not seeping coolant. The coolant and oil is not mixing, and we don't have any compression going into the cooling system. So the car's not overheating. No issue really with the head gasket other than the external oil leak. Rocker cover gaskets are not terrible, but the spark plug tube seals are starting to leak. Pull the spark plugs out, take a look at them. There's a little bit of oil on the 2 back spark plugs on either side of the engine. The spark plugs are worn. I would go ahead and put a set of spark plugs in it, as well as general tune-up stuff. I've already cleaned the IAC and the throttle body and adjusted the gap on the used plugs. They were a little bit out to get it to run a little bit better, because when I purchased the car, the owner did say it had a little bit of a stutter to it. I wanted to make sure, you know, that it was nothing mechanically wrong with the car before I transplant this engine. But that's another video and another time. So dealing with the engine leaks and everything going on, I'd go ahead and pull the engine and do a master reseal kit. Subaru sells for basically every engine they make a master engine reseal kit. The one for this particular engine is about $275. That gives you every seal, gasket, O-ring in the entire engine, basically from the crankshaft up. So head gaskets, rear main, intake, exhaust manifold gaskets, rocker covers, cam seals, crank seal, anything you could basically name. It's the entire complete overhaul kit for seals and gaskets. So we go ahead and do that, get a nicely resealed engine cleaned up and ready to go back in the car. While we have it loose or out and apart, we go ahead and have the heads machined, go ahead and get them nice and smooth, go ahead and pressure check, make sure there's no cracks in them, make sure that our valve seats are good, that our valve guides are good, that we have no issues there. Go ahead and put new valve stem seals in it, which are included in the master seal kit. And all that work at my normal machine shop is about 200 bucks for a set of Subaru heads. That's to completely go through them, basically make them brand new. From there, timing belt water pump kit. We're a little bit past due, it looks like, for a new timing belt. Don't know when it was done, don't have the service history on the car, but the belt is pretty glazed, got some wear in it, got some spiderweb cracking, and looks like the print has worn completely off the belt. If you've watched any of my other videos on Subaru timing belts, the Subaru genuine belts are printed with white text that is made to wear off at about 80 to 90,000 miles, which is the replacement interval. So if your belt is completely black, it is time to replace it. If you can still see the Subaru part number and the marks on the belt, you have a little bit of time. But just a general thing, if you see a car and don't know any of the maintenance on it, to know how long the timing belt's been on there and if it's time to change it. So timing belt water pump kit full from ASIN is about $240. We'd throw a new thermostat in there with a new gasket, that's $20. New coolant, about 30 bucks, 40 bucks. Oil filter, $25. Gear oil, we'd go ahead and service the transmission. The manual transmission gear oil is quite dark, as well as flush out the rear diff, drain and refill new gear oil. So about 60 bucks worth of gear oil. As I said, new spark plugs, that's about $30 for a set. The brake fluid in the brake master cylinder and the clutch master cylinder is very dark. It needs to be replaced. So about $10, $20 worth of brake fluid. Go ahead and flush that out. We do have a failed ball joint on the passenger front. That's about $30 for a Subaru genuine ball joint. Real quick replacement there. Other than that, front suspension is okay. Don't see any major flaws. We did see that there is some wear in the inner tie rods on both ends. I would go ahead and put new tie rods in it. That's about 40 bucks a side, so 80 bucks for your tie rods. Would need a front end alignment after that. Local shop charges me about 60 bucks for alignments. Other than that, what we got is on the power steering. The top power steering hose, the suction hose, has gotten really hard and brittle with age. It is leaking a bit. So most of you have watched my older video on power steering noise in Subarus with the 6-cylinder and the 2.5. Most of the time in the cold weather, the reason you get that whine from your power steering pump is because there's an O-ring that goes right there where the fitting comes out of the pump that will get bad and suck air. Also, that suction hose gets hard, doesn't seal up very well, and sucks air as well into the power steering system. And when you get air in the system, it makes the pump whine. So new hose, new O-ring, about 30 bucks as well. All 4 struts on this car look to be Subaru original, not been replaced. Ideally, you'd want to replace your struts every 60,000 miles or so. These look like they got the full 176 on them. They are busted. They've been leaking for some time. As you can see here, that's a big wad of oil and grease and gunk that has been leaking out of this strut. So a full set of 4 KYB Excel struts, which is the OE from Subaru, is about $300. Other than that, and to the rear suspension, we don't have very much damage back there. As I said, we got some rust on the cross member and on some of the suspension arms. Flake it off, hit it with a wire brush, spray it with Rust-Oleum, and good to go. Front and rear brake pads and rotors are still in decent shape and don't need to be addressed right now. But the rear control arm, rear upper control arm bushings are pretty much shot. They need to be replaced. That runs about $11 a piece. So 22 each side, so 44 for the whole rear. Other than that, not much going on back there. The rear diff bushings are a little worn, but that's to be expected. But they're not torn, and they're not like completely torn through, so wouldn't really worry about that. Other than that, I've got a clutch kit on here. The clutch kits I use are normally CarQuest or Perfection brand through Advanced Auto Parts. And the price I've got on the clutch kit is about 200 bucks. That's for a new pressure plate, clutch disc itself, the throwout bearing, and pilot bearing. Local O'Reilly's does my machining for flywheels. I think that's about 10 bucks, 15 bucks for the flywheel if we don't have any major issues where the flywheel is cracked or anything like that. This is all speculatory on the clutch. I don't have any reason to suspect the clutch is bad, but it may be the original and unknown. So we're just figuring that in there just because of the mileage. All these parts I've named off, all the prices I've named off, what does that come to for a grand total? How much money would we have to sink into a 2002 model Outback with 176,000 miles to have a reliable running driving car that we could drive every day? Well, as I said, the initial cost was $300. If we take all the parts I've listed and add them up, that comes to $2,147 worth of parts. Of course, I don't count my own labor because it's my vehicle, and we're doing this kind of as a DIY scenario, so we won't worry about the labor here. So grand total, your full investment in this car with purchasing it and doing all the mechanical necessary repairs, you'd be at $2,447. Is that really a good investment? Would putting $2,100 in a 2002 Outback with 176,000 miles be worth it? A car that probably doesn't Kelley Blue Book for that amount of money. Honestly, for a base model Outback, it might be $2,500 at the very top tier in perfect condition. And as we saw, this one is not that great when it comes to the interior, and it's also a base model. If this was a limited with leather, it'd probably be worth that. So, verdict, would it be a bad investment to put that kind of money in this car? And it's a case-by-case scenario, but honestly, I would be comfortable myself putting that kind of money into the car to have a nice running driving vehicle that would have cheap insurance, no car payment, and cheap property taxes on for $2,447 that I could, most likely, if you stay on top of the maintenance, could expect to get another 170,000 miles out of the car easily. It's kind of like what I did with my personal 2002 LL Bean Outback. Most of you that's been subscribed or watched the channel for any given amount of time have seen my black LL Bean Outback. It was basically the first Subaru featured on the channel, and most of my early repair videos were on that car. I purchased the car for $500 from a customer back in 2012, I believe it was. And the problem was, the customer brought me the car, had a cracked radiator. They drove it home on the cracked radiator, overheated it, blew the head gasket. Simultaneously, they had a cam cover gasket that had been leaking for a long time, and they ran it low on engine oil, so they had a rod knock on top of it. So replacing the engine would be the cheapest option at that point, plus a radiator and a couple other things it needed. And they just weren't going to put the money in the car. I offered them $500 for the car as it set. They accepted, brought me the title, and it was mine. So 2002 LL Bean, which is the top tier model, leather heated seats, automatic climate control, dual sunroofs, all the bells and whistles for a Subaru Outback at the time. Paid $500 for it with a clean title. It had 233,000 miles on it at the time. I ended up putting an engine in it, a salvage yard engine from LKQ. I believe that engine had 133,000 miles on it. It was right at 100,000 mile difference between the odometer on the car and the engine. I think I got the engine for about 800 bucks, put a set of plugs in it, did all of my seals and gaskets on it. I think I ended up putting front brakes on the car, ball joints, new set of tires. This was not right all at once, but over the years, inner tie rods, a couple wheel bearings, and AC repair, a couple, odd and end things. I don't know how much money I truly have in the car because I haven't kept track of it. If I had to guess, I would say probably about $3,000 at this point. I've been driving it for 8 years. I've got 296,000 miles on the car, so, you know, it's been a good car. My property taxes are $20 a year on the car. My insurance is cheap as dirt for full coverage. And I wouldn't hesitate to jump in it tomorrow, drive to California and back, you know, cross country, because I know the car inside and out. I've turned basically every nut and bolt on at this point, and you know, I know it's good to go and everything's right on it. I do have a couple things I need to address on it. As any higher mileage car with, you know, almost 300,000 miles on it, I'm starting to get a little bit of an oil leak at the front timing chain cover, the upper oil pan getting a little bit of oil seepage. Not really a leak, just seeping out. I got a little bit of noise from the timing chain guides or tensioner rattling around sporadically. You know, it needs another set of tires at this point. I need to put struts on it. I'm pretty sure it's still got the factory struts on it. And you know, other than that, it's not really a ton of stuff I need to do to it. No car payment still. As I said, cheap property taxes. The registration, everything like that is cheap as dirt. And it's a good, reliable car. It's got all the features I would want in a car. I mean, it wasn't my 2019 WRX. I mean, it didn't have, you know, Android Auto and Apple CarPlay and all the new crazy creature comforts, but I still like the car. So I'm gonna keep driving it and putting money into it until it's no longer feasible. So yeah, I got off a little bit off of the subject at hand on this car, but yeah, not really as bad as I thought it was gonna be. It actually is a pretty solid little car. Before we go, I know a lot of you listening to the engine at the end of the other video heard a knock and thought I had a knock in the engine. After seeing your comments and going back and listening myself, it does sound like the engine's knocking, but it is not a rod knock. I did pull the timing cover off, as you saw, to check the timing belt, but the knock that I'm hearing is from the timing tensioner. I couldn't get a real good shot of it without taking the whole front of the engine apart, but the timing belt tensioner is covered in oil. It looks like the hydraulics have gone pretty much shot in it. So it's knocking on the mount, the timing belt tensioner mount on the front of the engine, where the little hydraulic peg rest is chattering on it. So that's what the sporadic knocking noise in the engine is. It's not a rod bearing, thankfully. I do have a good mechanically sound engine, so this will be a good one to transplant into the 2004 Outback. Also, I have not diagnosed the parasitic draw that is the issue with the car, the main reason why they got rid of the car. The charging system does work. It does put out about 13.6 to 14 volts charging. It will charge the battery. That's not the issue. The issue is if you let the car sit for a while, the battery goes dead when you come back out to jump in it. So in another video, we probably will go ahead and try to diagnose the parasitic draw on this car and have that as a diagnostic repair video before we go ahead and start parting this thing out and throw all of its pieces into 5 other cars. So with that said, thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys in the next one.